and just enjoy seeing them back in the air again. So I don't know what it's like to be out in your houses dealing with that, and what the options are in different approach groups. Our party does not have a position on climate change because though we're a small party, our views on this and the urgency of and how to respond are extremely various. Where we differ from other parties, but not from the UAP, is that we're in favour of getting rid of the ban on nuclear, and that might be the single overlap that I'll have with some of the Liberals, not with the Labor Party, not with the Greens as a party, but hopefully with some Green voters. There are many people who have been environmental activists for many years, even Extinction Rebellion people, the UN and others who think that to get baseload power now, you have to have nuclear in the mix. I don't know where all of these green new jobs are going to come from in the coming months, but we'll find out maybe as Loy Yang closes for repairs, even in this coming months. And that's all I have to say. Thanks for listening to me.
And the winner is James Demarches from the Liberal Party.
Thank you, James.
Good evening, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is James. I come from a migrant family background. My grandparents migrated in the 50s from Macedonia. We came here and we thought, wow, freedom of opportunity, this is the land. So we came here, we enjoyed Melbourne's multiculturalism. To this day, we still do. And we're grateful for the opportunities that this country has provided us. I want to start off by saying thank you for hosting this event in our beautiful suburb of East Melbourne. It's always healthy for democracy to have such occasions. Now, I understand via the briefing that conservation and historic preservation are amongst the top priorities for residents here, and you shall find an ally in me to advocate for this. We live in a time when sadly people value the dollar more than Australian values, and I can certainly see how we must be protective and cautious in this beautiful culture of East Melbourne, not only for now, but for future generations as well. And I'm sure I don't need to tell you the most significant examples, some of the most significant examples of this city's beautiful architecture are here in East Melbourne. You know, I can vividly remember as a boy, as a child, walking down Clarendon Street and holding onto the gates of the Bishop's Mansion and thinking, wow, who lives there? Is it a haunted? Is it a witch that lives there? I remember thinking such absurd things, and the picnics in Fitzroy Gardens, etc. So there's many memories here. But I'll never forget the quietness, yet so close to the city. That's one of East Melbourne's beauties. Development has its place, and at a time when cost of living and housing affordability is so important, we cannot allow in my backyard to prevent the building of homes and buildings. Like many things in public life, it is about balance and moderation. In relation to tonight's second issue, the noise caused by the aviation, it would seem to be an even trickier issue to try and resolve. My thoughts on this refer to the council motion that has now expired. The reintroduction of the Fly Neighbourly Agreement. It is my understanding that the agreement worked quite well. The residents of East Melbourne would surely benefit from its reintroduction. I support this agreement, but I would also look at taking this issue to the Senators of Victoria, those of whom who have a larger sphere of influence. I would be more than happy to welcome this discussion of any of these matters with you after this forum, or even indeed in our questions. But again, thank you for having me, and I look forward to speaking to you. Thank you.
We only have one candidate left tonight, so we'll call on Colleen Bolger. Speak for 3 minutes. Thanks, Colleen.
We've missed Adam Pratt.
Yeah, I'm very happy to be the Victorian Socialists' first candidate in this area since we formed as a party in 2018 with the aim of getting a socialist elected into Parliament. I think a socialist in Parliament would be a person to stand up to big corporations. And that's the opposite of how federal politics goes a lot of the time. One thing, we've got a consensus now between the two major parties on lowering the taxation rate for the highest income earners. And we know over the last 30 years, we've seen the tax rate on corporate profits go lower and lower. And yet over this time, corporate profits have been booming. And in the pandemic alone, Australia's 47 billionaires increased their wealth by collectively 56%, at a time when teachers, nurses, public servants were flat out getting a pay rise of more than 2. So I think when we talk about the cost of living biting, we need to talk about it in terms of inequality and economic injustice, because it's not a question of us lacking the money to pay for the sorts of measures that could ameliorate those pressures, things like increasing the pension and other welfare payments, or introducing or raising the federal minimum wage to $30 an hour. It's a question of the political will to make the people who can afford to pay more do so. And on the question of climate change, a socialist in Parliament would put a case against a net zero framework for our targets, because net zero allows corporations to buy their way out of their obligations to reduce emissions further. Instead, we need to talk about what an actual zero emissions economy looks like. And that means things like renationalising the energy sector so we can close down coal mines, shut down gas projects, and invest in a publicly owned renewable energy sector.
Oh, darling.
Of course, we need to be talking about what we can do now, not by 2050. Lastly, I want to commend our Senate candidate, Aaron Malvarganan, to you. Aaron is a Tamil man who arrived here as a 13-year-old seeking asylum, but as an unaccompanied minor was detained in the Villawood Detention Centre. If, like me, you think that the treatment of refugees has been a scourge of federal politics for the last 20 years, then supporting Aaron sends a message as a man who experienced these policies directly. It sends a message that this is an issue that matters to us deeply. Voting for socialists also contributes to putting socialist ideas back into our political arena, because the problems we're confronted with are so urgent and of such a scale that they demand more radical answers than what is often on offer. If it's not this time that, or in this seat, that we're able to do it, we are a real chance of achieving that aim of getting a socialist in Parliament in the state election. And with your support, we can lay the basis for that now.
Thanks, Colin, and thanks to all of our candidates for their introduction. Now it's over to you, folks. I have Luke Martin down the back, who's a committee member of ours. And, he will be wandering around with the microphone, and you're welcome to ask questions of the candidates as you go. So it will be on a hands-up basis, and we have one right here.
Thank you.
Asks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question for Adam, and I agree with quite a lot of what you said, but given that you have a stance against, it's to do with the financing of your, you talk about putting a cap on electoral donations, and so I'm just wondering how much has the Greens spent in this particular election? And I'd also like to ask the other candidates how much they have spent on this particular election.
Okay, thank you. Over to you.
I don't know the answer to that. In terms of the cap and what we want to do, our proposal is to put a cap, two kinds of caps on. One would be a cap on donations coming in, so that no one can donate more than $1,000, no matter who they are, to whichever candidate they want to do. So $1,000 per year, so that would stop the big donations coming in. The second thing about spending, we also want to see caps on what political parties can spend during elections, because if we had caps on what political parties can spend, you would actually remove in many ways or minimise the need to seek the donations in the first place. And I think people would probably appreciate it as well if a bit less was spent on political advertising and communications during elections. Well, it's certainly if there was a level playing field where everyone could spend up to a certain amount. I don't, I'm not trying to be evasive. I don't know the answer about what we spend other than to say we get a lot of our donations. A lot of our donations are small donations. We don't take donations from developers or big coal and gas corporations. We will be spending less than Liberal or Labor during the course of this election. But sorry, I just don't have a dollar figure to hand.
Thanks,
I
Adam.
find that amazing that you have no idea what the.
If you could pass that along to the next. Thanks.
Is your question in Melbourne or in nationally? I can answer for Melbourne because I know, because our campaign in Melbourne is 100% funded by local donors. And they're all small donations, so, and small individual donations. And we started 3 years ago, we started fundraising. So we're spending about $100,000 in this electorate. And that has all been raised locally, none of that has come.
How much did you say, 1,000 or 100,000?
If I could estimate, I'd say based on your outdoor advertising, you're spending about $100,000 a week currently. That would be my guess based on the same sites being offered to us and what they would be, what they cost.
I'm not sure how interesting our answers are going to be. Spending about as much as you'd expect, which is probably a couple of $1,000s.
We have a budget of $100,000 for the 11 seats that we're running in across the northern and western suburbs as the new party. That's a people powered campaign raised through donations. I would say that the caps on donations don't necessarily benefit small parties like us. It's a question of where the money is coming from. So in the 2018 elections, we received significant support from the trade unions, and that we were really proud of that. We would never accept donations from corporations, but we're proud of our association with the union movement, and it's actually done us a disservice to have those caps. So I think it's more about where the money is coming from and the influence that it has. And although the question about limiting spending and evening up the playing field is a reasonable suggestion.
Thank you. My campaign, the campaign of Melbourne, we've spent about 10,000 at this point, and a lot of hours talking to people and businesses in the local community. So, yeah.
Okay. Pauline Hanson does not fund any candidates at all. I've received 2 donations. One from a Muslim doctor, which is a client of mine, for $1,000, and another one for $500 from an insurance broker. The rest has come out of my pocket in the vicinity of $80,000 to date. So I have funded my own operation as to what I believe in. Candidates, as far as I'm concerned, should fund their own campaign, not the actual major parties should fund any candidate's campaign. Thank you.
Richard might have had to go, so we don't have any comments from him. Luke? Fabel?
Thank you. I'd like to ask a question about an issue which really affects the lives of so many people in this suburb. Some very brief comments by way of background. I'm talking about the impact of aircraft. I didn't order that helicopter that flew over us 10 minutes ago. And I've got some maps which candidates might like to look at. It looks like a bowl of spaghetti. It maps the sorts of impact that we have to suffer from every single day. The reason for it was that some years ago there was deregulation by the federal government of small aircraft. They don't have to follow particular flight paths anymore. And then to make things worse, they instituted a concentrated flight path for the large jets going to and from Tullamarine. They used to go to Balti Bridge and then turn. Now they're being concentrated from Victoria Gardens, one narrow concentrated path. And that was done without any community consultation, with not proper environment assessment. We took the issue up with the aircraft ombudsman. He issued a scathing report on those 2 issues. but nothing has happened.
Alphington.
The aircraft ombudsman doesn't have any powers, so he can make recommendations. We spoke with Air Services Australia. They made some nice, warm, cuddly comments, and absolutely nothing has been done. Now they've told us wait until the plans are finished for the Melbourne airport, and then something might be fixed. So we've got a system which is stacked against the community that looks after particular commercial aviation interests. And I've got a couple of points I'd like to put to any of the candidates who'd like to respond. And just important to say, we're not against aviation. We realise it's very important, but what we do want is a balance between the needs of human beings and commercial operators, and that balance doesn't exist at the moment. The questions I'd like to ask is, if you get into power, into a position of influence, will you support bodies which provide equal voice for affected communities in aviation policy making? Not just a body like Air Services, which is skewed to the industry, but bodies formally established which provide a community voice. The second one is, will you support the establishment of a genuine independent body or organisation to overview this? The aircraft noise ombudsman at the moment is actually paid by Air Services, whom you supervise, so that's real independence. And the third one is, will you look at review and change the way that Air Services operates? They're the regulatory body, and actually make them give them a mandate where they have to take into account the community, not just aviation interests. They're the three things: a representative body, a genuine independent oversight, and air service operations. And very briefly, just two supplementary things to the coalition candidate. We have made many approaches to the minister, have received no joy. Will you commit to actually using your influence to change this? And to the Labor candidate, the East Melbourne Group has written 3 letters to the Shadow Minister, received no response. Does that show how much you care for our community?
Thanks, Matt. So I think what we'll do is we'll take the question to Liberal candidate first.
They're laughing.
I'm not sure.
And then anybody else that wants to speak.
All right, jog my memory because there was a lot there. So the first part you were saying, will I support some sort of independent body? Yes, I would be an eternal advocate for that completely. I think it's definitely something that should be done. And at the moment, I feel like there are so many institutions where there's overlapping jurisdiction. It's quite difficult. So that's the first part of your question. The second part of your question sort of links to the first. I believe it was about me using my influence and connections. Yes. I would set up or put you in touch with the senator that of your choosing, the patron senator for the. What was the other question in that one?
The other one was an independent oversight ombudsman and looking at the way that Air Services operates.
Provided it was in line and similar to the first sort of independent body, if that didn't do its job, we'd look at something. But I think you'd start there. That's a good starting point. Yeah.
Thanks, James. I think there was a question for Keir as well, I think. And then we'll come back to you, Walter.
I think so. Okay, the last question, I couldn't, are you talking about the state or the federal?